You are standing in a forest, no phone, no map, no compass, just trees in every direction and silence. Your heart rate climbs. Your eyes dart. You spin slowly, hoping something familiar will click. Nothing does. Within minutes, most people today are completely, hopelessly lost. But your ancestors? They walked thousands of miles across continents they had never seen before. They crossed deserts, mountains, and open ocean. They did it without a single piece of technology you would recognize. And the real answer for how they did it is far stranger and far more impressive than you ever imagined. Let's go back. Not a few hundred years, not 1,000. Go back 40 or 50,000 years to a time when your species had just begun spreading across the earth like water, finding every crack in a stone. There were no roads, no cities, no signposts carved into wood or stone. There was only the world, wild and enormous, and your ancestors had to move through it. They had to hunt across it. They had to survive it. And the first tool they ever used to navigate was something you still carry inside your skull right now. It was memory. But not memory the way you use it to recall a parking spot or a phone number. It was a different kind of memory entirely. Richer, deeper, embodied in the landscape itself. Psychologist David Rubin, in his landmark study of oral cultures, discovered something startling. People who do not rely on written language develop a form of spatial memory that is almost architectural. They build mental structures. They walk through them. Every route they know becomes a kind of invisible building in the mind, where each landmark is a room, and each turn is a doorway. Rubin called this the palace of the landscape. The ancient world was not a blank wilderness to your ancestors. It was a cathedral of memory they had spent their entire lives constructing. Think about what that means. When an elder in a hunter-gatherer group said, "Go toward the place where the two rivers argue," that was not poetry. That was a precise navigational instruction. The confluence of two rivers creates a distinctive sound, a distinctive shape of land, a distinctive smell of water. Your ancestor had memorized that sensory fingerprint years ago and stored it in exactly the right room in their mental palace. They could retrieve it instantly. They could navigate toward it without hesitation. But memory alone was not enough. Memory fades. Memory distorts. So your ancestors built something outside the skull too. They built landmarks, not physical markers they constructed, but natural features they elevated into meaning. A crooked tree, a rock formation that looked like a crouching animal, a hillside where a particular bird always nested. These were not decorations. They were the original road signs, and they worked precisely because they were chosen for being impossible to confuse with anything else. Anthropologist Wade Davis, who spent decades living among indigenous communities across 4 continents, documented how these landmark systems could extend for hundreds of kilometers. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples created what are called songlines, routes across the continent encoded not into maps, but into songs. Every verse described a landscape feature. Every melody held a direction. The pitch of a note told you whether the land rose or fell ahead. The rhythm told you how far to walk before looking for the next feature. A person who knew a songline did not just know a route. They could sing their way across a continent they had never personally walked because the song itself was the map. Read that again. The song was the map, not a metaphor for a map, not a memory aid for a map. The song itself contained every piece of navigational data a person needed to cross thousands of kilometers of Australian desert and scrubland without a single written word. Researchers at the University of New South Wales confirmed in 2016 that several songlines correspond with extraordinary geographic precision to actual landscape features, some of which date back over 10,000 years. Your ancestors were encoding GPS coordinates into music before the wheel existed. Now look up. Your ancestors certainly did. The night sky was not background scenery to the ancient mind. It was the most reliable navigation system on Earth, available every clear night, perfectly consistent, perfectly predictable, and utterly free. Polaris, the North Star, sits almost exactly above the Earth's North Pole. It does not appear to move. Every other star wheels around it across the night. Your ancestor, lying on their back in a field 50,000 years ago, could find north in under a minute just by watching which point in the sky stood still while everything else turned. But the stars offered more than just direction. Anthropologist Duane Hamisher has spent years studying the astronomical knowledge encoded in Aboriginal Australian oral traditions, and his findings are extraordinary. Different star configurations rose and set with the seasons. Your ancestor could read the position of the Pleiades at dawn and know whether it was time to move toward the coast or stay in the hills or begin the long walk toward the winter hunting grounds. The sky was a calendar and a compass combined, and your ancestors read it as fluently as you read a street sign. During the day, the sun took over. And this was more sophisticated than simply knowing that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Your ancestors tracked the sun's arc across the sky with precision. In summer, the arc is high and long. In winter, it is low and short. A person experienced in sun navigation could estimate the time of day, their latitude, the season, and their general heading, all from a single glance at the sun's position. They could also use shadow sticks, a straight branch pushed into the ground, to track the movement of a shadow tip across the ground. The tip traces west to east as the sun moves east to west across the sky. The shortest shadows marks true noon. The line from the stick's base to the tip at noon points directly north or south, depending on which hemisphere you stand in. This was not a crude trick. This was a finely tuned instrument made of wood and sunlight, used reliably for tens of thousands of years. Water was another guide. Rivers always flow downhill, and downhill eventually leads to the sea. Your ancestors knew the drainage systems of their territory the way you know the layout of your own neighborhood. They knew which streams fed which rivers flowed toward the coast, and which mountain passes separated one watershed from another. Moving along a river gave you constant orientation. You always knew roughly where you were in relation to the sea, the mountains, and the other rivers you had memorized. You could triangulate your position across the entire landscape from the movement of water alone. And then there was wind. In many regions, prevailing winds blow consistently from the same direction for months at a time. Your ancestors knew this. Desert peoples in North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula used the direction of sand dunes as a compass. Sand dunes align perpendicular to the prevailing wind. If you know which way the wind blows in your region, you can read the dunes like compass needles across hundreds of kilometers of otherwise featureless desert. The Polynesian navigators who sailed open ocean between islands thousands of kilometers apart had mastered all of these systems and added several more. They read ocean swells, which maintained their direction for enormous distances, regardless of local wind and weather. They watched the behavior of birds, knowing which species flew toward land each evening to roost, and following them. They felt the temperature of the water with their hands and feet, knowing that certain temperature gradients marked underwater ridges that pointed toward islands. Some navigators reportedly lay on the floor of their canoe and felt the swells through their body, using their spine as a compass. Researcher David Lewis documented all of this in his 1972 study of Pacific Island navigation, and the precision he found was staggering. Polynesian navigators could hold a course across open ocean for weeks and arrive within sight of their destination island on the first attempt, without instruments, without maps, without anything except a mind trained since childhood to read the ocean like a page of text. But here is the thing that should stop you cold. All of these systems, the songlines, the stars, the rivers, the winds, the swells, they were not techniques that individuals figured out alone. They were knowledge systems built up over thousands of years and transmitted through generations by story, song, ceremony, and practice. They were social technologies. The navigation knowledge of a community was not stored in any one person's head. It was distributed across the group, embedded in their culture, sung at their fires, acted out in their rituals, passed from grandparent to grandchild in the exact same way you were taught to look both ways before crossing the street. Researcher Rubin Kimmerer, a botanist and member of the Potawatomi Nation, argues in her work that indigenous knowledge systems like these represent a form of intelligence that is genuinely different from the kind your modern education trained you to use. Not inferior, not primitive, different. It is intelligence that is relational, contextual, and embodied. It lives in the relationship between a person and a landscape built over a lifetime of careful attention. And here is the part that reaches back from 50,000 years ago and touches you directly. Your brain still has this capacity. Neuroscientist Eleanor Maguire's famous 2000 study of London taxi drivers found that the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for spatial memory and navigation, was measurably larger in experienced cab drivers than in the general population. The more a person navigated from memory, the more their brain physically grew to support it. Your brain is still the same brain your ancestors used to cross continents. It responds to navigation practice the exact same way it always has. The hardware has not changed. Only the software you use has changed. Every time you type an address into your phone and follow the arrow without looking at the landscape, you are choosing not to build that cathedral of memory your ancestors built. Every time you let the screen decide your route, you're handing off a capacity your brain would otherwise develop. That is not a moral failure. It is simply a trade. Convenience for capability, ease for depth. Tonight, if the sky is clear, go outside and find the North Star. Look for the Big Dipper. Trace a line through the 2 stars at the front edge of its cup, and follow that line about 5 times the distance between them. The bright, steady star you land on is Polaris. Your ancestor would have found it in under a minute. You can too. The same brain, the same star, the same darkness your species has navigated by for 50,000 years. Nothing has changed except how much you choose to pay attention.